Trump just wants a ceasefire. I don't think he would object to military support for Ukraine. He has said many times that Ukraine needs to defend itself. And so I don't think he would have any problem with that. And in fact, he has welcomed European nations buying American weapons and providing them to Ukraine.
Hello and welcome to Frontline for Times Radio. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're going to be speaking to Kurt Volker. He is the former US ambassador to NATO and former special envoy to Ukraine in Donald Trump's first term. He's also a distinguished fellow at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. And we're going to be discussing this imminent meeting or perhaps summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and maybe also Volodymyr Zelensky, what that meeting means, what the Americans and Ukrainians are going to be trying to get out of that meeting, and whether this has brought us closer to peace or a ceasefire in Ukraine. Now, if you are watching us, remember you can also listen to us in podcast form, wherever you get your podcasts from. And you can also, if you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe for a membership or just subscribe to the YouTube channel, Times Radio. And remember to find us, it is Frontline for Times Radio. Ambassador Volker, thank you very much for joining me today on Frontline.
It's a pleasure. Thanks.
Kurt, we are expecting a meeting between US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin in the coming days. What does Donald Trump, and for that matter, Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine, need to get out of this meeting?
President Trump has been pushing for a ceasefire for a very long time. Ukraine has agreed to that, and Russia has not. And every time that Trump speaks with Putin or sends Steve Witkoff to go see him, it's about trying to get a ceasefire. Putin keeps not doing that and coming up with other things. And now the latest thing is to have a meeting with Trump and then a trilateral meeting with Trump and Zelensky. What needs to come out of this is Putin to agree to stop the war.
And it's well known that Putin and the Kremlin do sometimes use meetings like this to try and delay or manipulate foreign leaders. How big is the risk that that's what's going to happen here?
Sometimes. They do that all the time. They have no serious intention of ending the war. They use things like this to get us running around in circles. We have to be conscious of that and not let that happen.
And what is the imagery on display here if Putin is forced to meet Zelensky? Is that a climb down for the Russians, given their position on Zelensky's position as president of Ukraine?
I don't think so. I think he pretends that it's a climb down. He pretends that he's above all this and Zelensky's not a legitimate leader of another country. Ukraine's not actually a legitimate country. Zelensky's not legitimate, etc. That's his narrative. But in reality, Putin knows that Zelensky is the leader of Ukraine, and it won't harm him at all domestically for him to be seen meeting Zelensky.
But do you agree with Zelensky's own assessment that it's this increased pressure on Russia economically and through tariffs that has brought Putin to the table here and made them more likely to agree to a ceasefire?
I think that Zelensky has learned how to speak Trump, so that Trump is doing this. Trump is pushing for the meeting. Trump is pushing for the ceasefire. Zelensky learned from that Oval Office meeting. Don't argue. Don't put the Ukraine and the United States on opposite sides. Just work together. And so he's going along with where Trump is taking this because that's the smart thing to do. I think in reality, Zelensky doesn't think that Putin is responding to anything.
And of course, there's some level of pressure that's been applied economically. Tariffs have come in on India, which have been linked to their buying of Russian oil. Is it right to kind of bring these on slowly, start at 25%, then move to 50%? Or should we've brought the pressure to bear on countries that are supporting Russia, countries like China as well as India, a lot faster?
Well, you should definitely put pressure on China at the same time. It doesn't make sense for the U.S. to target India, which is a more friendly country and more likely to be helpful, and not to put pressure on China, which is a less friendly country and less likely to be helpful. So it's important that we would do that. Second, I think that these tariffs, they're an okay way to go, but they are targeting an entire country. I would much rather see sanctions, secondary sanctions, in addition to this, that really target the individuals and entities that are taking part in the sanctions evasion. Those would be the vessels, the ports, the insurance companies, the banks, importers, refiners, anyone who's working on Russian oil and gas and participating in the business. They should be subject to sanctions so that they cannot do business anywhere in the world.
And we've heard from the White House that the US is still preparing more of these third-party tariffs. Has Trump at least found a tool here that works for him to bring pressure to bear on the Kremlin?
He's found a tool that he likes, which is tariffs. And he's using it all over the world for all kinds of reasons. And it has been successful, I would have to say, in some cases. He has gotten changes of policy that he wanted in Mexico. He did pressure the EU to cut a deal which leaves 15% tariffs in place, but looks like it's going to also be combined with purchases of U.S. LNG and investment in the United States. He's gotten U.S. companies that have decided to increase their investments in the U.S. So he's achieved a lot with these tariffs. At the same time, the goal here is about getting Putin to stop the war. And the two aspects to that are going to be drying up the finances for the Kremlin, which is what this is aimed at, but it's not clear that this is going to be successful in that case. And to make sure that Putin sees that Ukraine has continued sustained military support and that he's already reached his high water mark in Ukraine and that it only gets worse from here. I don't think Putin really sees either one of those yet. So there's a lot more work to do to get him there.
And, the White House are keen to at least threaten that China is next on the list for these third-party tariffs that are coming in to put pressure on Russian oil revenues. How much impact could that have if that comes true, if they do start to bring pressure to bear on China economically?
Yeah, it's unclear because the last time they tried to put high tariffs on China, China retaliated in a very effective way. And the US ended up backing down. And it's not clear that doing that this time, China would then decide, oh, well, we'll comply and stop buying Russian oil and gas. Rather, they might decide to retaliate against the US.
Both China and India have said the tariffs won't have an impact. They'll keep buying Russian oil. But they would say that, wouldn't they? I mean, is there any reason that we should believe them when they say that these tariffs will actually deter them?
Well, I think in the case of China, I tend to believe that because I think they feel they have more leverage over the US. In the case of India, I'm not so sure. Because on the one hand, they're very nationalist and they resent the idea of being told what they can and can't do. On the other hand, I think their economy is a little bit more fragile and a little bit more impacted by these potential tariffs. So they might find that it's just not worth it.
And on the talks themselves, one idea that's being floated now is that Putin might agree to a ceasefire in the air. Who would benefit from that, though? Because Ukraine has also had their own long-range strike campaign, which has been impacting Russia.
Yeah. Look, a ceasefire in the air, I think that would benefit Ukraine because of the nightly attacks on Ukrainian cities. But at the same time, as you say, Ukraine has had increasing success at going after Russian military facilities and fuel depots and oil refineries and ammunition depots. So it would take that tool away from Ukraine, the increasingly successful drone strikes that they have there. But I think the Ukrainian people would welcome the respite. But I don't understand why you would have a ceasefire only in the air. Why not on the ground? Why not at sea? Why not a comprehensive ceasefire?
And we've heard that in the run-up to this meeting, Zelensky's planning to have more calls and other meetings with European leaders. What reassurances should Zelensky be seeking from Europe at the moment, if a ceasefire is now back on the table?
Well, there are a couple things. First off, to lock in non-recognition of Russia's occupation. It's one thing to have a ceasefire and tacitly accept that Russia is occupying parts of Ukraine. It's another to recognize those as Russian. That should not happen. To avoid pressure to give up territory that Russia hasn't already taken. To make sure that European states are prepared to step in with a reassurance force, continued military and financial support so that future Russian attacks are deterred, and to accelerate Ukraine's path toward EU membership so that Ukraine can recover economically and get stronger faster.
And if Zelensky can agree with European leaders to get military support as well after a ceasefire, after this stage of the hot war is ended, is that something you think Trump would object to, or will he allow that to happen?
I think Trump just wants a ceasefire. I don't think he would object to military support for Ukraine. He has said many times that Ukraine needs to defend itself. And so I don't think he would have any problem with that. And in fact, he has welcomed European nations buying American weapons and providing them to Ukraine.
And where does this leave Putin's attempted conquest of Ukraine? Obviously the Russians will try to claim anything that comes out of these talks as a victory for them, but is this a victory for Russia simply because they've seized more land in Ukraine?
Well, Putin will certainly sell whatever he's done as a victory. And he will also not stop here. He will view this as a pause and try hybrid means and other ways of undermining Ukraine for a while, and come back to military options again after he's let his forces rest and recover and rebuild.
And what do you think has actually changed in the thinking of the Kremlin and in Putin's mind, in thinking, which has led him to decide that now's the time to come to the table with Trump and potentially Zelensky as well?
Well, I think it's all tactics on Putin's part. He's tried to drag this out as long as he can. He's tried to use diversions, meetings, Istanbul statements, nuclear threats, temporary ceasefires. He's done all sorts of things just to keep stirring the pot without having any real intention of changing anything. And that's still what he's doing.
So do you think Putin has that room to maneuver now that he used to carry on dragging this out? Or is it now reaching the culminating point where Putin's allies are facing tariffs, the economy is slowing down? Is Putin going to be worried now that this is really the end of the road?
Yeah, well, I'd say that's up to us. We have to be resolute here. We need to put in place the types of sanctions, tariffs, financial measures that will really squeeze Putin's finances. And we need to keep up the military support for Ukraine and make sure that they have the ability both to defend themselves, particularly in the air, and also to strike targets deep inside Russia. Give them the capabilities so that they can do that. One thing that I suggested in an article in The Economist this week was NATO should be tasked to help Ukraine develop a more strategic, layered, integrated air defense, because that would take away one of the more effective tools that Putin has been using to terrorize the Ukrainian population. So that would be a logical next step. Having already tasked NATO to acquire and deliver the weapons, why not task them to integrate them and make them more effective as well?
Well, Kurt Volker, former envoy to Ukraine under Donald Trump's first term, thank you very much for speaking with me today on Frontline.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, Louis.